Hey folks, Malforian here, and today we're having one of my rambling discussion videos. I know how much you all enjoy them, and today we're going to be talking about EU5 and exploration. Now, I will say this video is going to be valid for about 6 days, because Johan did mention in the latest Tinto talks how exploration is going to work, is going to be the next dev diary. So next Wednesday, we are going to know roughly how this is going to work in EU5. But I was talking about it with somebody on the Reddit forums. Yes, I braved the Reddit forums. And we were having a discussion on there. And you know what? I thought I'm going to make a video about this because I had a cool idea. Let me know what you think in the comments down below as I explain this on how I think it would be cool for especially ship-based exploration to work in EU5. Because if you haven't played EU4, it's okay how it works in here. The problem, well, I wouldn't say it's a problem. The difference with EU4 versus something like Civilization is that, like, most of us are playing on the realistic map. I don't think many of us play on, like, the randomized map or anything like that. A lot of us play on the standard, normal Earth map, and that is different to Civilization, where I think most players play on just the randomized maps. People do play on true start location Earth maps, all of those, obviously they do, and then obviously in Civ, exploration is a bit boring, because you know where everything is. It's not that exciting. I think one of the good things about Civilization is that the beginning of the game, I'm sure many of you might agree with me on this, is the most exciting part of Civilization, the game, because you're exploring, you're finding new worlds, and you don't know how they're going to be set up at all. Even if you choose, like, islands or continents kind of set up in the map, you don't know exactly how big this land is. Maybe you'll settle somewhere, and then you discover it's a massive continent, and you're kind of exploring that as much as you can. Or maybe you just find a chain of islands, and you set up some island cities and things like that. So I always enjoy that part of Civilization. Now, EU4, EU5, any of these Paradox games, we are playing on a real map. So exploration can't work the way it does in Civilization because you know where places are. If you're playing as Portugal, as you can see in the screen at the moment in this example, I know where the New World is. I know where North America is. I know where South America is. I know where the Caribbean, aka the Caribbean, is. And I could, if I'm playing the base game with no mods, literally just pick a fleet and sail there. Because in the base game, I believe this is still the case, you can just remove the fog of war on ocean tiles by just sailing into them, basically. I can't remember the name of the DLC. Somebody can let me know in the comments down below. I've totally forgotten it at the moment. It changed how exploration works. I've got a fleet set up here. I have it actually set to a mission already, so we'll leave this running, and you can see he's up here in North America. I said explore the North American coast. As you can see, I've already done that once, but he's going to sail around and try and discover more land. Now, during this mission, as I say, if you've not played EU4, you don't control your ship here. It will just sail around and discover in the area you're roughly telling him to do. And there you go, he's finished doing it. He didn't find much more, actually. He found a little bit of the coastline of Greenland, and then he's going to come back down here, and we'll get a pop-up saying, I've finished my exploration mission. There we go. I finished the North Atlantic coast mission, and then we can choose another one. We can go in here, explore, and then Caribbean. I kind of thought we'd get another Eastern American coast option, but I guess we need to find more of it over here. So Caribbean Sea, we'll do that, and you'll see he'll start exploring this, and he'll find the Caribbean or the Caribbean, however you want to pronounce it, and then he'll come back again, and we'll get another option, you know, maybe discover the Central American coastline, something along those lines. Now, this system, I think, is okay. You do get the kind of sense of exploring the world, but again, you kind of know where things are, and especially here, I can say go to the Caribbean. Well, how do I know the Caribbean's there? I don't know it's there, do I? It's only because I, as a player, know geography and I know the Caribbean is there. So that is why it's shown as an option. You know, you're kind of told places exist before you find them because that's just how the system works in EU4. And again, I see why it works this way. And I don't think it's a terrible system. It's a lot better, as I said, than the base game where you can just sail wherever you want and you can just discover everything and it's fine. This system at least kind of sets up a little bit of a game of trying to find places and then having to explore them further, and then you can settle on there and things like that. So it's pretty good. It's not the best system, I don't think, but it serves its purpose in kind of limiting who can explore early on, and it kind of plays out semi-realistically, historically. Now, as I said, we will find out next week how it's going to work in EU5, but my idea is kind of similar to this, but it would work differently. So I'm Portugal over here, I'm set up in Lisbon, and then what would happen is I would get a pop-up and it would say something like, let's just say Christopher Columbus has visited your court. He wants to explore a western route to India. You know, this is historically why this happened and why we ended up finding America. And he would come up to us and say, here, can you give me 300 gold, say, and I'm going to set off on an expedition and I'll come back and tell you all about the wonders of India. And then you would say yes, no, or a third option, which I'll talk about later on. Let's not complicate this any further. And then you would basically fund him, and then he would sail off, and you wouldn't see where he'd gone. So it would be like this, and then you'd see like his course go into the fog of war, and then you wouldn't see what happened after that. And then after X amount of time, he would just return to Portugal, and then you'd get an event that pops up saying, wow, Christopher Columbus has returned, he's got stories of a new world. And then you get a little bit of a blurb, maybe you get some trade goods, it would come up saying like you've discovered potatoes, sugarcane, I don't know, whatever they came back with the first time, lots of wondrous things. And then what would happen next is, it would, I don't know, maybe like zoom out, and it would show you the area that he discovered, and it wouldn't have a name or anything. Like maybe it would automatically name it like the Caribbean or something, but it would basically show you where he discovered. It would show the route there, show him coming back, and then what would happen after that is you could then fund another expedition. Maybe then you could implement one and say like, oh, Christopher Columbus found these islands. Can you now, with this money, set up an expedition and go back to that place? And then they discover more of it. So this is where it would kind of merge into how it works in EU4, where you'd be able to say, go to this place, find it, and then after it found a certain amount of it, maybe that's when it would trigger and say, we've called these lands the Caribbean or something like that. And then again, you could set up a port in the Caribbean, and then the same thing would happen again. Maybe someone would come and say, I believe there's lands to the north, can you give me 75 gold, and I'm going to go and discover these lands for you. And the same thing would happen. You would see them disappear into the fog of war, and then they would come back and say, yep, this is what I discovered, here's the maps I've made. And that would be like the basics on how I think this would work. I hope that makes sense. I know it's a little bit rambling as always with some of these videos, but I think that would be a cool way of doing it. Now, the other part of it is twofold. One, you could have it where it has a certain percentage chance of failing. Maybe if you don't fully kind of provision the fleet, or maybe there's always just a chance that they won't come back. So you could send off Christopher Columbus, and then you're waiting like a year or two, and he just never comes back, and the fleet is lost, and you just have to go, well, I'll just send another guy to do it. And he would then go do it, come back successfully, hopefully that time, and then you would see, the same thing would happen, but it would be on the second explorer. And maybe you could even have events where they find the old settlement or something and say like, look, everyone died, Columbus sank in the North Atlantic, and, you would then move on from that. I think that would give that sense of actual exploration. Now, that can happen in the EU4 version. You basically have attrition, and if the ships go down to 0 attrition, they do just disappear. But the thing is that you can see all the land they've discovered. Even if they die in the middle of the Atlantic, you actually see where they went to. So, like, how does that work? The ship sank, but you did get told what they discovered. Now, obviously, this is a game. I know that is sometimes lost on players of Europa Universalis. This is a game after all, so I can see why it does work that way. But I don't know. I think this way would be more interesting. You'd send these fleets out. Maybe they wouldn't come back. You only discover the lands when they do come back, and then kind of like build it up a little bit. And then as in EU4, once you've found that land, you can then just manually send your fleets there and kind of continue in your normal adventures. The other idea I had, and this is one that I think people might disagree with, I'm not too sure, again, would bring back some of the exploration of it as much as you can in a game where you know where the map is when you send these fleets off, maybe they don't go where you say. Maybe you'd say, go west, try find the Caribbean. That's what you're kind of aiming for as maybe Portugal. But actually, he gets lost on the way, and maybe he finds North America instead. And then when he comes back, you're sat there thinking, like, great, he's going to find the Caribbean. I can then send other fleets there. We can get colonizing as I want to, all good times. But then when he gets back, he goes, I found the Caribbean. And you're like, oh no, that's not the Caribbean, that's Canada or something. You know what I mean? And then you would have to make that decision like, well, do I want to go up to Canada instead? I now know where that is. I can get a bit of a jump start and pivot what I want to do as a nation. Or would you say like, okay, here's the second amount of gold again. This time, can you actually try find the Caribbean for me, please? I don't want to live in Canada, thank you very much. And then the same thing would happen, and he'd go off, try find it, come back, and maybe this time he would find the Caribbean, and then you could continue, as I mentioned before. Like I say, this is just a rough outline. I'm sure there's different ways it could work. I'm sure there's some better or worse systems you can all think of, but I was trying to think of ways to kind of bring the exploration part of exploration back to Europa Universalis, because it is an exploration game at the beginning for the most part. You know, if you're playing as one of the major nations in Europe, you are probably going to do some colonization. And as I said, I think how it works now is fine, but I'm trying to think of ways to make it actually a little bit more interesting to actually do exploration, because I'm sure many of us have a min-max way of doing it. Okay, I'm going to play as England, I'm going to go to where they historically went to, and I'm going to set up my colonies in North America, and I'm going to do all of this stuff, and it's going to be a good time. And maybe you always do that. Maybe you never go, I'm going to be England, and I'm going to go colonize in South America instead to start with. So building in this little bit of variation where maybe you're not always going to do the exact same way, because maybe you do fund that explorer, and as I said, you send him to North America, and he doesn't go there. He accidentally gets windswept down into the Caribbean or even into Brazil or somewhere. And then you're thinking, well, I could expend a bunch of money to try do the same expedition to North America, but you know what? Brazil looks pretty good. Let's just go there again because it's cheaper, because I've already been there once and I can sail my fleet there manually, or I could just explore further there and kind of get a bit of an advantage down there. So as I said, let me know what you think in the comments down below. I just thought this would be an interesting way of kind of sprucing it up a little bit, making the exploration part of the game a little bit more interesting with, as I said, us as players knowing where everything is, putting some kind of randomization into it a little bit. And of course, you could always have the game options where you could choose it the way it works in EU4. But I think this is a cool way. And as I said, next week, well, we'll know how this is going to work. So we will see exactly how it might work in EU5. But before I leave you, I will say this would open another idea for me for exploration, and that is around something like the Hudson Bay Company. If you don't know what that is, I was recently reading a fantastic book called The Company, The Rise and Fall of the Hudson Bay Company. I would recommend it to you if you're interested in Canadian history, well, to be honest, North American history, or just interested in like this era of the world. It is a fantastic book to read. And it is all about how it was just a bunch of people who set up the Hudson Bay Company and sailed to North America, went into the Hudson Bay and set up like a string of forts. And they were the kind of like genesis of Canada, but it wasn't ever really built, this company, to do settlements. It was all around making money, much like, you know, the East India Company and things like that. And you could also use this system to do that. Maybe you could have somebody come to you and say, I want to explore Canada, give me the money. And then maybe as England, you're just like, I don't have the money for this. But then the burgher estate or even the noble estate could come in and say, do you know what? We've got the money to do this. So here's the money. And then this will be like a private enterprise. And maybe if we do use the Hudson Bay Company as an example, they would go into Canada and they would build up not like settlements, but maybe a string of forts, as historically they did. And then they'd be like playing the trade game. They wouldn't concentrate on settlements. And then maybe later on, you could decide to integrate them into America. They would work kind of like a vassal of yours, and they would maybe explore, they would maybe do trading, and you get some of the money from that, you know, something along those lines. I think this system would also open that up as an option where you could have these third-party, private kind of companies setting up, doing some exploration and really more focused on money making. I think there would have to be some limitations. I wouldn't want like the whole map just to be all these private companies building things. Maybe it would always just be historical options that happened, or maybe you could have it randomized but like limited, so you could only have like 2 per nation or 1 per nation or something along those lines. But again, you could have these like crown colonies and then these private ones, and they wouldn't really expand. They'd be more about making money. Maybe they could have armies. Obviously, historically, ones in India and places pretty much set themselves up as full colonies, but it was very different to like a crown colony like Jamestown or somewhere like that, which was, I'm not going to say primarily around building nations, but it was most of it versus companies that were there just solely to make money. But anyway, that was another tangent I wanted to go off at the end of this video, but we'll leave it there for today. As always, hit that like button if you've enjoyed the video today. It helps other people find the channel and the videos, and also lets me know that you enjoyed it. And then secondly, of course, if you have liked the video, you have pressed that like button, please subscribe to the channel if you're new here. I'm covering EU5 up to official announcement, launch, and beyond, and I cover Crusader Kings in a very similar way. So if you do enjoy this, do let me know, but we'll leave it there for today, and I'll see you in the next one.